Thank you, everyone, for joining. I have the privilege of introducing you guys to Dave McPherson, a registered provisional psychologist here in the city of Calgary. Thank you, Dave, for joining me. How are you today?
I'm well, Matthew. Yeah, thanks for the chat.
That's awesome. For those that don't know me, my name is Matthew. I have the privilege of being a part of the admin team here. But I wanted to introduce you guys to Dave today. As I mentioned, Dave's a psychologist here in the city. But Dave, I just wanted to, right off the bat, just kind of get a chance to ask a little bit about you. And one of the things I love, and I always brag about you on this, is tell me a little bit about the unique house that you guys have here in Calgary and some of the maybe the all the different animals that you have. That's very unique. I love that about you.
Sure. Yeah, no, we do have a pretty unique place. It's we live in a house as old as time. It's built in the 20s by my great grandfather. So he and his family immigrated to Canada from Ireland a long time ago, and they built this house that we now live in. So it's kind of neat. It's my wife and I have four kids, and we live there, but it's in our living room. Like my grandma was married in our living room, and a lot of kind of neat history in the place. And yeah, we kind of aspire to be cool farm type people, even though we live in town. So we have the chickens. We did the whole chicken thing. We've got four of them, and then we've also got sheep. So we have three sheep that live in our yard, and we've got a big dog that's roaming around the place all the time. So yeah,
Oh,
it's a unique spot for
so
sure.
is it ever now? Nobody's going to hold me to this, but I'm pretty certain your house is possibly one of the only houses in the city limit that's actually approved to continue to have farm animals on the property, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of our animals are licensed. That's true. Yeah, but we're the only sheep in town.
I love that. There's a phrase. You're the only shepherd in town, I guess that's the other way of looking at that. That's
Yeah,
hilarious. Well,
yeah.
awesome. Well, Dave, maybe make changing the conversation or converting the conversation to more of a psychology based. So, as I mentioned, you're a provisional psychologist here in Calgary. What led you to the psychology field, especially after a long career, a continued career in the oil and gas industry as a landman?
Yeah, no kidding. It's a long and winding road. I've been down a whole bunch of different stuff. Out of high school, I thought I'd be an engineer. I like kind of building stuff, like meeting people's practical needs with that kind of thing. Yeah, I did all the calculus and stuff and went and did a year of university engineering and
Okay.
realized I was like, oh, wow, this is not what I thought and what I expected. And I met a bunch of other guys who like kind of had a vision of doing what I wanted to do, but they actually like loved all parts of it, the math and the helping out stuff. So I was like, I got to change this up. So I shifted gears and thought I'd train to work as a pastor, which I did. I went to school, did a degree in theology, and I did a master's degree in divinity, and I worked for a little bit as a pastor. Like to be honest, quite a lot of like anxiety about like kind of more front-facing leadership roles, and worked as a pastor for a while, but honestly felt I was terrible at it, even though I don't think I was that bad at it. But I did that,
Bit of
and
imposter syndrome, maybe, if I'm hearing that correctly.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, so kind of had kind of some great but also some hard moments in that. But realized I needed a pivot. So yeah, like gosh, 12, 13 years ago, I switched and I worked it's called as a landman in oil and gas, just managing leases and contracts for companies, different varieties. And so it's a
There's
long and
nothing
winding road
just
to get
about being a landman. There's a
just
lot
in,
that goes into being a landman. There's
just
nothing
in
just
the
about that
telling.
role.
Yeah. Yeah, so I worked in that for a while, and then that probably wasn't like the greatest fit, and my body told me that. So I like lost vision in one of my eyes just on account of not coping with stress and stuff real well, and probably not having like a massive amount of kind of passion or thrill for doing the business side of that role. Realized I needed to change. I thought back about the different moments in my life that I found particularly meaningful and that I was helpful, and people said found that I was being helpful to them. And it was a lot more to do with just kind of one-on-one chatting with folks, trying to help them figure out what was causing some distress and figuring ways through it. And so yeah, I did a retrain. I did another master's degree in counseling psychology. And yeah, even though I'm like getting the gray hair and long in the tooth here a little bit, learning all sorts of new stuff all the time, and decided to go the route of registering as a provisional psychologist with the College of Psychology in Alberta. Partly because there's like a level of competence required for sure, but also just helping out people like claiming through insurance and trying to make it more accessible for people and that. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of practicing under this current license. Is that
That's great. Yeah,
yeah?
that's really helpful. I guess my follow-up question to that is, what are some of the favorite types of clients you enjoy connecting with? I know you work with
Hmm.
children, teens, you also work with a lot of couples. What do you enjoy and what are some of the issues that you support people with?
Yeah, I do support quite a few people. Yeah, all sorts of
You really
demographics.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I really love helping people with is trying to find that sentence that they just need to say. Usually
Interesting.
need to say something. Something's got to be articulated, and we don't always know what that is.
Mm,
And so working with folks to try and find out, yeah, some area of their life that requires a little bit of attention and working through that.
if I
And that
could,
can be kids, couples,
yeah,
adults, working with all sorts of different things. But I
like
really love working with people in it.
yeah, like what do you mean by like that statement that people say? Obviously, respecting confidentiality. What would be a typical example of something that almost is like what
Sure.
I hear you saying is like on the tip of their tongue, maybe psychologically, but they just have never been able to articulate it. Is that kind of what you mean?
I mean, in a way, like what I mean more is like sometimes we're kind of an enigma to ourselves. You know, we can kind of feel and tell something's wrong. We don't necessarily know what it is, and just sort of helping people talk through that. Like that's why I like psychology, talk therapy or insight-based therapy. It's trying to gain a new perspective or insight on something that's troubling you, and that comes through bringing something to speech. So it could be, thinking through things and finding that someone cares. So I see as my role is entering into people's hurt and pain empathetically, then trying to help them say something that's troubling them. So it could be like a difficult kind of cognitive thought, like an automatic thought, like I'm a failure or I'm unwanted or nothing I do matters. Like
I'm not good
sentence like
enough
that,
for
not good enough, that kind of thing. Or it could be a relational thing, like my spouse wishes they hadn't married me or something hard like that, or nothing I do is good enough or whatever. Or with
wow.
kids, it can be like I'm just, that, my friends don't want me around or something like that.
Mm,
So those are hard things that probably you don't have as just a sentence ready to write out,
yeah.
the drop of a hat, but you can feel that deep inside and helping people bring that out so they can address some of those fears and worries and anxieties and find ways
Mm,
to connect or kind of work with some of the cognitive distortions or whatever. Yeah, I find that
interesting.
pretty meaningful. Yeah.
I have two follow-up questions to that question. We're kind of going a little bit off script, but I love
Hmm.
this thought. I guess my first question is, this is more of a philosophical question, is why is it so hard for us to maybe sometimes even just by ourselves get to a point where we can communicate those words
Mm.
outwardly? So we actually recognize maybe the beliefs that we're believing. I don't know if this relates, but there's been lots of times where I have a negative thought about myself, but then I'll say it out loud and I'm like, I can't believe I think that about myself. That was my
Yeah,
first question. And then maybe a follow-up to that is, and then how do you help people process through those negative beliefs that they have about themselves?
sure. Well, I mean, there can be all kinds of things, but I find for most of my clients, there's often like an underlying fear. Like our fear of rejection or fear of not belonging is like as basic as they come, we're
Right.
all afraid of that. One psychologist that I actually really love is an old guy. His name was Alfred Adler. And he actually interpreted all kind of psychological maladaptions as coming out of that feeling like we need to feel like we belong. He had a great
Mm,
German word called Gemeinschaftsgefühle, which was that feeling of like social belonging. And he thought it all came from that. And the struggles that we feel being like inferior is a impetus for us to push forward into that. So I think a lot of it comes out of that. It's just, do I actually belong, or am I alone? And so some of our thoughts can come out of that. I mean, obviously there's a bunch of other reasons that could come from that, but that I see as a pretty big one. And there's lots of
And how do
different
you
approach.
help?
What's
Yeah,
that?
how do you help people? How do you help people maybe recognize and then work through those fears, maladaptive, maybe
Yeah.
irrational fears that they may be struggling with?
Yeah. So there's lots of different therapeutic interventions I might use with a client. I use this sort of like a foundation, though, something called a client-centered approach, or it'd be a humanistic approach, person-centered. It's all the same thing. And basically, the idea there is that I just communicate empathy to you, that I want to feel as you feel, let you know you're not alone in that. And I
Mm.
pair that with something called unconditional positive regard that comes from another awesome psychologist called Carl Rogers. And it's, my position towards you doesn't change regardless of anything you say or do. It's no condition, positive regard to you. And with that as a framework, then we can use other different interventions. So we could use something called cognitive behavioral therapy, where you try and identify kind of an automatic thought and then how your mind is maybe distorting that in some unhelpful way and challenge that with some alternative thoughts. Or we could use maybe an emotion focused therapy where we try and understand what's the purpose behind your emotions that's driving some of those thoughts. Or occasionally we use a narrative therapy where we try and understand what sort of storyline you're kind of telling yourself and who the different characters are and what some alternative storylines could be. And that's been quite helpful for people. And recently I've been trying to acquire skills for something called internal family systems that identifies kind of different parts within us that each have different roles and what each of those are. There's a few of those. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So if I
Mhm.
could summarize what I hear you saying is there's almost like three steps in what I heard you say. The first step is you help the person maybe understand a maladaptive or negative belief they have about themselves. For example, I'm afraid of being rejected. And
Mm.
then you'll use person-centered approaches where empathy or some other approach helps you bring down those defense mechanisms and those walls so that you can use CBT or EFT or some of these other modalities to help reframe those thought process. Is that a fair assumption of what kind of the process you help a lot of your clients through?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. So I mean, I think it's important to use evidence-based practices. And some of the evidence is very interesting. It's the therapeutic rapport, so it's called, the connection or the rapport you have client to therapist is really, really important. So that's why the person-centered and unconditional regard is so foundational. And then they've done research that found like if your therapist proposes a therapy, hopefully an evidence-based one that they believe will work, and the client believes that'll work as well, it's less important what it is than the belief that it'll work. So
Mm.
if you feel like you trust your therapist and you're willing to do that, it's often very effective. So that's why I'll use a number of different therapies, but depending on client need. But yeah, that would be pretty fair assessment of how I go about things.
I had a conversation with one of our other therapists, Tola Balajobi, and she had a similar comment, which is the number one important key to success is the client, counselor, or therapist relationship, and
Mm.
how important that is that there's that mutual trust. And that's what I hear you saying is that if that's there, the therapies and the tools that you use are just going to be that much more successful if there's that trust. If I
Yeah.
could just, oh, sorry, go for it.
Yeah, no, that's what I was also going to tell you. Like this work is very different from any of the other work I've ever done, right? It's like I used to work as a builder, so I'd work for a timber framer, and you just, if you're able to lift the big beam, then you can do the job. This kind of work, therapy work, is just by its nature, it's just personal. Like you can't do this without being yourself. And we don't always connect, super easily with everybody. So finding like a therapist that actually connects, you feel like you connect with this person is super, super important. And if I always tell
Mm.
my clients this, is like if you feel like there's a good connection here and you'd like to work with me, I'm very happy to do that. But if you don't, then that's okay too. We'll find someone that'll help you'll connect with in a meaningful way. So that amount of fit is really, really important. Yeah.
This is a bit of a joking statement, but that requires you to be a very secure person and to recognize when you might be walking in fears of rejection or not being wanted.
Yeah,
You
I
have to be a
suppose
very
so.
healthy, you have to be a very healthy person as a therapist. You know, you're putting yourself out there almost every session
Yeah.
to potentially be rejected. If I could segue, we talked about a lot of great methodologies or sorry, modalities that you utilize, which is just a fancy word for those of us that aren't therapists. It's just a different type of tool, you know,
Hmm.
metaphorically speaking. One's a socket wrench, one's a drill or something like that. They're used for different things. One of the other methodologies that or modalities that you're trained in is the Gottman method, which is specifically utilized for a lot of couples therapy. I'd love for you to maybe explain a little bit of what Gottman method is and how that is utilized in couples therapy to support the health of that couple.
Sure. Yeah. John and Julie Gottman, man, have some phenomenal resources. Very, very helpful
Mm.
tools for basically for like relationship building. They do a lot of work for couples specifically, but any relationship. And I think at the end of the day, it basically always comes down to communication in relationships and troubles in communication. That's the biggest part of it. And so the Gottmans, they have a whole method that can be quite involved for couples if you do the whole thing. But you can use elements of their approaches at any time. But basically, what they're trying to do is they talk about something called a sound relationship house, and you're just trying to build a solid relationship where the two of you can live in harmony
Mm.
and more than harmony, like enjoyment, right? That it's like mutually meaningful to you. And so there's talk about like helping each other understand and move towards your dreams and
Mm.
do meaningful things together and obviously find like love and support together. And then they obviously they acknowledge that there's a lot of common threats there. And so they talk about what's called they call them the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, and how they threaten relationships and bring them down. And then different kind of they have antidotes to each of those things. So I've worked with couples lots and lots with the Gottman method to try and get out of very common pitfalls like an accused defense cycle that couples fall into all the time, where it's as natural as
What, what
anything, but it never leads
what would
to a
be an
good
example?
place. And
Yeah, what would be an example of an accused defense scenario that a typical couple would get caught in?
oh, I mean, it can be something as simple as like, really, that's how you load the dishwasher, It's like, and then the person just feels accused, like there's something deficient in them, like they don't know how to load a dishwasher. They defend themselves. It's like, well, it doesn't matter how I do it, right? Like I did it fine. And they're like defending themselves and often like accusing the other person of something, as opposed to like trying to maybe get a little bit curious and try and understand, like, well, why is it important for you that I do it this way? That seeks to build a little bit of understanding. And the Gottmans have helpful stuff, like they talk about solvable and perpetual problems in a relationship and different ways to approach those so that you're rather than just always fighting about something that's probably never going to resolve, you take approach of trying to understand your partner in a deeper, newer way. I find their tools pretty helpful, and a lot of couples have too that I've worked with.
I got a philosophical question to follow up with that. Yeah, I know you're married, I'm married. I
Yeah.
think we all hear that, marriage can be difficult at times, but you get married and you're like, oh, wow, things like how you load the dishwasher actually can be an issue that, like, it's so
Yeah.
minor, but it can really cause big conflict.
Yeah, I picked
And
like
I
the
guess
lamest possible example there, but
but I'm pretty certain that my wife and I could beat that in terms of lame arguments that have resulted in
yeah.
conflict, not healthy conflict.
Yeah.
I guess philosophically speaking, let's use that example. What is it that really is like, what's maybe generalizing, what's going on there? Why can that result in such large feelings, emotions, conflict, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, can be a lot. Like again, I think it comes back down to that that fear of disconnect, relational
Mm,
disconnect. So when, especially with couples, like you're kind of putting a lot of your hope for deep relational connection. You're investing heavily in this one other person, right? And
mhm.
in marriage, if you're committing like, okay, the rest of my life I'm with you, you're you're putting a big bet on that relationship working, and you're willing to invest in it and commit to it. And then you find like, oh shoot, we grew up in two very different households, and we have two very different views on the world, and our value systems are maybe different than we thought. And it's like I hear you say that, and I interpret it, or my brain goes to a kind of a funny way of assuming I understand what you mean, and sometimes they even did mean it that way, and it's just hurtful, right? And it can draw a wedge between people. And so there's that, I think, fear of disconnect from someone that you really love and you were desperately hoping to connect with, can cause all kinds of, I don't know, hurt and pain. And I love working with couples that are willing to spend a little bit of time talking about these things and trying to learn new skills and change their behaviors a little bit. Like things can change, man. Like you can change your behavior and your ways of thinking that can really lead to a much better relationship. Like you can heal from the hurts, and you can help soothe the pain for each other. Like and honestly, a lot of times it's not even like rocket science. Like it's not really hard things. It's just learning a new skill of kind of managing emotion and being in a relationship that it's I try and have a little bit of fun with couples with this sometimes, because it's like you're practicing a new skill that you never were taught. You didn't grow up seeing anyone doing this, so it was never modeled for you, and you're just gonna be really bad at it for a while, like learning a new skill of anything. And so I try and help couples have a little bit of fun of like just being really bad learning the skill, but eventually you'll get there, until like the Gottmans talk about relationship masters, where it's second nature to them. They just don't even think about what they're doing because it's so natural to be in a really helpful, meaningful relationship. There's a ramble for you, Matthew.
I love it. I love it.
Got me going with
I
the
mean,
Gottmans.
there's so many other questions. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the questions I have, I mean, you mentioned the word fun in relation to couples counseling. Let's be real. Culturally speaking, the first word that comes to mind when you think of couples counseling is you don't think of fun. Another kind of cultural generalization a lot of people think of when they think of couples counseling is the idea that the counselor is going to pick one side and that person's right and that person's wrong. I almost like to think of it as like the judge and jury paradigm of
Mm.
counseling. Is that what couples counseling is like?
I don't know. It depends which side's willing to pay me more, I guess. Yeah.
I'm assuming that's a
Uh,
joke.
yeah. No, like I'll tell couples like I'm not on either of your sides. I'm on the side of your marriage. Sometimes people do kind of want that. They want like a almost an adjudicator or something like that. And that's not my role. Like I do mediate conversations a lot of times and help, like, because you feel like that accurately represents your position, or what are we missing here? Things like that, just helping with the conversation. But like with couples, I'll often ask the question like, how did you get together to begin with? Right? Like
Mm,
like there had to have been some attraction, right? That you ended up with there. So like let's think about that. How did that happen? What
right.
derails that? Like in what ways do you
Yeah.
actually have fun? And I've kind of I don't tell anyone how to live their life, right? I'm not interested in that. But I'll invite people as like, what would it look like if the two of you were just really playful with each other? Like what does that look like? And relationships, I think, should have an element of kind of fun in them. And so sometimes we'll do that in sessions together. Like obviously, I mean that really depends on the couple. Sometimes things are, not at a place where you need to, laugh and have fun. Like there's obviously really serious, hard conversations that we have a lot of times too. But a lot of folks when they come to talk to me, it's just like things just aren't right. They're like spending a lot of times in different rooms and it feels cold and frosty. And I just want people to want to try and help them warm things up a little bit.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that is when is it the right time for a couple to engage in the counseling or therapy process? I hate to use those words. They sound so reactive. But like,
Hmm.
when's the right time to connect with you as a psychologist?
Yeah, I would say when you feel compelled. So when you need the change.
Mm,
I can't keep going with this the way it is. And the reason I say that is because having that motivation to change is a big predictor of change.
mm,
So if you're feeling like things are fine and I don't need to make any adjustments or whatever, I think I think you can always benefit and always layer on new levels of skill. So even if you feel like your marriage is going awesome, your relationship is amazing. And I do have some couples that come to me for that. They're like, we just want to be very proactive in this, and there's lots of skills we want to add and layer on, and always be investing in this. And I love working with people in that case too. But I'm thinking of sometimes sometimes it's a little unbalanced in the relationship between who feels like they need counseling more than the other. And so I would say when both of you feel like something's got to change, it's like, yeah, okay, let's figure out what that change can look like.
really good. Follow-up question. Do you recommend people doing individual counseling before couples counseling before individual, or some sort of hybrid parallel scenario? What
Hmm.
do you recommend in those types of scenarios?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a formal recommendation. I know the Gottmans do. Like if you sign up to the full Gottman method, they have an initial session with to both together, and they have separate sessions with each party and come together again. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. I can understand why they do that, but like not everyone has the means to afford a lot of those sessions. So it kind of depends on that. Like if and also kind of the issue at heart, you know. So like I also use something called a solution focus lens in therapy that it's the approach is in broad strokes. Like I don't really care kind of what happened or what led you to this point. It's just you need to change. So let's figure out what that's going to be. And for some couples, that's good. It's, if we can solve this and get you going in a new direction in one session, that's awesome, right? We can work on solving a problem and finding a new way forward together. But for a lot of folks, like at least having the first session together is helpful for me because I can kind of see what the dynamics are
Right.
and get a sense of what will be helpful. And then if we need to have sessions apart, we can do that too. But yeah, I don't know that I have like an actual intake formula. Like if I only ever did couples therapy using the Gottman's method, I could answer that question much more specifically for you, Matthew. But because I don't, and I use some elements of their method, not the same every time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine every situation's somewhat a little bit different. And the eclectic mix of different modalities and therapies that you choose to use may be different for each couple and or individual within that relationship.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Just changing topics. I think we've made significant progress in culture around the stigma of mental health. However,
Mm.
we do still see that a lot. There's a lot of people who think that, going to a psychologist must mean there's something almost biologically wrong with you, like you're schizophrenic or something, of a
Mm.
significant nature. I guess my question to you is what would be the advice you'd give to someone who's feeling hesitant about seeking counseling? They're struggling with
Mm.
negative thoughts about themselves. They're struggling in their relationship. They're just not feeling but there's emotions that they just can't understand. What would be some advice you'd give to them that are struggling with that hesitancy
Mm.
to engage therapy?
I would say first off, man, do I get it? If I could talk to my high school self, there's no chance in high school I ever would have gone to see a therapist. Like no way. Partly because of the stigma, partly because it's like who wants to talk about emotions all the time? Like I totally get that. Yeah, I would say now that I'm further down the road and I know a little bit more about what it actually is and the importance of connecting and speaking truthfully as you can, and kind of understanding the purpose of emotion, what's going on in your brain, all that stuff. Gosh, it's helpful. It's
Mm,
so helpful to talk to someone, especially someone that you feel genuinely cares for you, wants the best for you, has some helpful tools you can layer on. Yeah. It's like confidentiality is a huge gift that I give to people as a mental health professional. I don't talk with other people about all these issues that I see. It's super valuable. That's lame. It's more than that. It's it's a very proactive measure to find health and healing that you want, that you need. There's a lot more freedom and health out there, I think, than we sometimes appreciate.
I've heard it compared to if you have a bone sticking out of your arm, you
Yeah.
go to the doctor, you go to the hospital, you get
Yeah.
medical help.
Yeah.
I think there's times where we metaphorically, mentally have bones
Yeah.
exposed. There's something physically, or metaphorically speaking, it's very clear there's something wrong. We recognize it, yet there's just this hesitancy to get help. And
Mhm.
if I could maybe just last question, I think one of the groups that struggles the most with engaging in that process and getting help is us guys. I don't know if it's just we just want to chug through, or we could just persevere, or I'm just curious why I don't know if you relate to that or you agree with that, but why do you think that it's so hard for us guys to seek help?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, to be honest with you. Like, there's lots of different factors and things I've read about that. But I don't know sometimes why it is. It's like why do I have a hard time asking people to help me put a new roof on my garage? Obviously I can just lift this massive sheet to the top of the garage on my own. I don't need any help. I
Of
don't know the why
course,
that comes in, it just
Superman Dave.
I don't know. It's so much better when someone's there to help, you know. I don't know. There's I think part of it, I'll tell you a little story for myself. So I once upon a time did some training to work as a hospital chaplain. I really liked that. And I had like great friends growing up, awesome family, lots and lots of good relationships. But I was sat there as like a 25-year-old guy in this little working group, and someone asked me, "Is like, tell me about a relationship you have, Dave. Like, tell me about the relationship you have with your best friend." And I was like, "It's good. Like, it's a good relationship, super solid." And I felt like paralyzed, like I didn't even have a vocabulary to do that. Like I just never really thought about it before. What made the relationship good? And that was like kind of an embarrassing moment for me, to be honest with you, but also kind of an eye-opening moment. It's like,
Mm,
wow, I think I just am lacking skills to know how to talk about this, to know what that even looks
mm.
like. And so that kind of started me down a path of thinking a little bit more deeply about what is it about this relationship that I find satisfying or useful, or what causes me to stress in relationships? And being a little more reflective and like, oh gosh, this is actually really helpful because there's a lot of things I can do, right? To like make it better or to like relieve the distress. And so then I felt kind of empowered to do that. There's like a little personal story there. But I've
I
also
appreciate it.
kind of found out that like for a lot of guys, they just get kind of lost in like figuring out like what are emotions and what are they even for? And so I have a little tool called like an emotion wheel or something that starts at the core of it with like the six basic emotions. Maybe you've seen it, like six basic emotions that you can usually read off anyone's face anywhere you're in the world. And then it's like concentric. So it goes out and just tries to get more specific. And that's really helpful for like emotionally regulation. I use it for a number of different things, but one of them is for like just helping guys. Like I'll just give them this little wheel. And as we talk through a situation, it's like, okay, in the center ring, like which one kind of do you feel best? Like fear, sadness, happy, whatever. And then we'll just kind of work our way out. And usually by the time there's three ring to the outside ring, it's like, wow, we've gained a lot of insight into what was actually troubling you about this episode or this relationship. And then I can almost see it in their eyes, like a sense of hope, like, okay, yeah, all right, now I know how to go about solving that problem. But when you haven't really thought about what like your emotions are trying to do for you or how they're trying to guide you or something like that, then you just feel sort of like lost in it all. And so that could be one of the reasons men are kind of hesitant too, is like either like don't have the vocabulary or know what it's about, or feel like what's like, I just don't want to go talk about my feelings because you don't know why, But anyway, those are some of the tools I found that have been really helpful for men. I mean, for
Yeah,
lots of people, but men especially,
yeah.
just kind of gaining that basic level of skill sometimes. I don't know.
Well, that's
It
awesome.
feels like that's a very narrow answer. It was a long-winded, narrow answer to your question.
No, it's good.
It
I
was
think
pretty
you
cool.
provide your perspective on this topic. I mean, I have my non-therapeutic, non-psychologist perspective, which is I just think that a lot of us guys we grew up in families where guys didn't show emotion other than anger
Yeah.
and frustration. Those are the socially acceptable emotions
Yeah.
that guys are allowed to show.
Mm.
Funny story before we close out, as I had a friend, he was really, to use your language, unregulated. He was just angry. And I
Mm.
said to him, I said, and I had the pillow, I had the wheel. And I said to him, and I hit it for a moment. I said, what emotion are you feeling? He's like, well, I'm frustrated. I'm like, clearly. So, and I showed him the emotion wheel, and I'm like, okay, so you're in the anger category. Like,
Mm.
there's a
Mm.
whole, all these words. And he's like, oh, this is very insightful. And I was like, oh, great. So what emotion language would you use? He's like, well, I'm still frustrated. It's
Yeah.
just like, good try, good effort, we'll keep going. But I guess my
Yeah.
point is to us guys, my encouragement to myself is that
Mm.
there's literally a whole vocabulary of words to describe what we're feeling. And to your point, the words that we use can help not just communicate to ourselves what we're feeling, but it also can communicate to other people what we're
Mm.
feeling.
Yeah.
Anyways, for the sake of
I
time,
think
I think oh, sorry for it.
on that one
Yeah.
too, I'll just say out there, like I think men are lonely. A
Mm,
lot of men are super, super lonely. And
wow.
they want to connect, but they don't know how.
Mm,
And I actually got this from Dr. Randy Johnson one time. He said a lot of guys look at porn because they're angry, because they're not finding connection anywhere,
mm,
because they're lonely. And I think coming to therapy and coming to address some of those things that are deep in there. It's like, where do I find connection? How do I not feel so alone in this? You know, it can be really helpful when you identify it and you can talk about it, you can find
mm.
a new way of coping with that that's a lot more productive than just substances or whatever, all those
Right.
easy things you reach for to take the pain away. Anyway, sorry, I interjected there. You were
Oh,
wrapping
so
things up.
good.
Yeah.
No, it's so good. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me on this incredibly cold day. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I'm actually coming from the atrium that we have at Masters. So connect with Dave, come half an hour early, grab a coffee, come and hang out in this atrium, especially when it's minus 30 outside and it's nice and moist. It's nice and 23 degrees and humid in here. These are real plants behind me. That's not a fake background. But Dave, thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege to connect today. As I mentioned, if you want to connect with Dave, engage the therapy process, you can get more information on Dave on our website at www.masterscounseling.com. And we have a great admin team that can connect you, one of those being me in the evening. So thank you, Dave, and have a great day and stay warm.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Good chatting with you.
Awesome.